Okay, I call the public hearing for the budget to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it right over to Mr. Keegan, who's going to give us a presentation on the proposed school budget.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for being here tonight. We have a brief presentation, and we welcome any questions you folks may have. It is a small group, so feel free to stop me and ask a question if you have one. Superintendent Bowles will be also presenting with me. Jill, could I ask is that microphone going to be on that? Is that on, or that's not a micro? That's not. It's on. Okay, good. So ideally, if you do have a question, come up to the microphone just so we can make sure we get it on the recording. So without further ado. So we could, if you've heard of any of our presentations or been to our recent board meetings, you'll know that we just have so many wonderful things happening here at the district that we're proud of. We could do a several-hour slideshow with lots of slides celebrating our kids, but we had to pick out a few just to illustrate the point. And here's our marching band that won the New York State Marching Band Championship, and one of many successful co-curricular activities we have here at North Syracuse. So tonight I'm going to just walk you through a number of items. Traditional budget presentation. We're going to tell you some of the things that impacted the budget for next year, things we were thinking about, things we had to consider. We'll talk about our proposed revenues, our tax cap calculation. We're going to talk about the proposed expenses, and of course, we're going to buy vehicles again, or we hope to buy vehicles again. We'll talk about that. It's important that we let you know how we're doing financially, and we often do that by talking about fund balance and reserves. So we'll have a slide on that, a couple slides on that. We're going to talk a little bit about our capital projects and the need to use some of our capital reserve and debt service fund. We're blessed to have the Salina Library in our community, and they have their proposition on our ballot, and so you'll get a chance to see that. And then we'll just share some vote and election information and budget presentation information. Did you want to? So, you know, these are some of the considerations that we thought about as we put the budget together. I think it's something that the governor's talked about. A lot of people have talked about declining enrollment, but I think it's important to note that although our enrollment is continuing to decline, the number of students with special needs has increased. Also, our students they still have academic gaps resulting from the pandemic and social and emotional needs. And so really where I'm getting at with those first two bullet points are that the degree of difficulty for our teachers in the classroom today has increased despite the declining enrollment. Another important point, for the last several years, we've had federal stimulus aid. That's the CRSA and ARP funding, and both of those are ending. Our CRSA ended last year. We lost over $3.3 million in revenue, and ARP ends in September, so we won't have it for next year at $2.7 million. Numerous labor contracts. We have about 12 bargaining units, and these contracts are up for negotiations, and so we're still negotiating them, and so we don't have final labor numbers, so we had to put estimates in the budget, so we had to consider that. And we're operating in a inflationary environment. I don't need to tell you, all of us have experienced inflation in the last year. That's impacting schools as well. You know, we buy a lot of supplies and a lot of fuel and a lot of things that have impacted by inflation. So we have to incorporate that into the budget. But we also live under a tax cap, which you folks know. So the amount the amount we can increase the tax levy is limited. So we're really not able to pass those inflationary costs on to our taxpayers.
So the next half of this consideration, the labor market is extremely tight. In the past, when we had open positions, we would have, for an elementary position, no less than 100 applicants. Right now, there are positions when we have an opening that are extremely difficult to fill. In response to the loss of COVID aid and declining enrollment, we're eliminating 12.5 positions resulting from staff retirements. 6 staff members will be relocated, but we did not have staff laid off as a result of the position eliminations. We value the recent hires. We've invested, we've trained them well. There are less and less students going into the educational world, and we are competing with 23 other component districts just in this county. And the number of kids going to a 4-year college, we've talked about students going into the trades. There are less and less people going into the teaching profession. So part of our strategic plan, we started that in 2022, adopted a 5-year plan, and our mission: educate all students to the highest levels of academic achievement and prepare them to be productive, responsible, ethical, creative, and compassionate members of society. So some of the goals that we have set is number 1, graduation rate, reading, proficiency, and emotional competency. The new ELA curricula from CKLA and EL has been implemented, and we're gonna be going into our 3rd year next year. Community Schools has been a partnership with Onondaga County to promote SEL, and we've had Promise Zone specialists, access, and Liberty Resources. We've added student support systems that have been put in place to monitor students' mental health. And we've done a lot of professional development that's been targeted to empower staff and build the capacity of our system to improve both the academic and emotional supports for all of our students. So despite budget challenges, we believe the progress made on the strategic plan is sustainable. So this is a picture. Because of some of the things that we're trying to do in the STEM fields, 5 of our students, female students, won a challenge at the most due to this robotics challenge. And this team was from Gillette, but we did have 2 other teams also that did extremely well that were at Rocks Middle. And so that was competing with other middle school students all around the county.
Let me talk a little bit about our revenues. As you can see, as usual, we highlight our general state aid, our building aid, our property taxes, and we're going to talk again about stimulus aid. This is really where our money comes from. So one of the challenges we've had with our state aid is that the largest portion of our state aid is a thing called foundation aid. And a number of years ago, the state redid that formula to try to make the distribution of aid more equitable. Unfortunately, the state's really struggled to execute that. And North Syracuse is one of the districts in New York State that has been consistently short funded. About a third of the districts in New York State fall into that category. So when you hear the governor talk about people with lots of fund balance and reserves and receiving excess aid, that's just not us here in North Syracuse. And so unfortunately, we're about $700,000 short in our foundation aid funding this year. And it's just worth noting that over an 18-year period that this formula has been in place, we've only received our full funding 1 year, and that was for this 23-24 school year. Building aid. So thank you very much. The community's been incredibly supportive of the capital projects we have underway. The way the building aid works is we go ahead and borrow money to get those projects going. So if you've been up to the high school and you've seen all the work being done there, we've borrowed money to finance that work. And when the projects are completed, we get to file a thing called a final cost report. And at that time, our building aid starts. So you won't see, despite all the construction that we're seeing, you won't see a huge increase in building aid until the projects are completed. The property tax levy, I'm going to talk about that a little bit with the tax cap calculation, but we're very dependent on our local property taxes, and again, they are capped. And I just want to emphasize that we're in an inflationary environment where inflation's been significantly more than 2%, and we can only increase the levy by 2% or inflation, whichever is less. the inflation component of the levy. So let me give an example. You might say, well, what does that mean? Well, if the voters approve a capital project that has a local share, such as the Bear Road project when we did Bear Road, we're allowed to include that. So it's 2% plus what the voters approved to support Bear Road. That's just one example. The federal stimulus aid, I just can't emphasize enough how important that's been for our kids to overcome some of the challenges of COVID. We've deployed those funds. I'm really proud of the way our board and our cabinet and our team has worked hard to make sure that we're deploying those funds in the most impactful way. But like all good things, they're coming to an end. Okay, so Micron. As you know, a lot of talk about Micron. And one of the things that is important to note is that when the county tries to attract businesses to Central New York, they offer these things called pilot agreements. It's a payment in lieu of taxes. And what that basically means is that, Micron's going to develop that entire facility there, but they won't get taxed for the full value of that property. It's an incentive for them to come build in our town. We won't tax you at the full value. Instead, they'll make a pilot agreement, and that pilot payment related to that agreement will come to the school district. But then the way the tax cap works is that we have to reduce your taxes by the same amount as the pilot agreement. So we won't, even if we get $1 million, for example, a year from Micron, we'll just lower the taxes by $1 million. So we won't net any additional funding. And so we were really excited. Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about the president coming to town?
As Micron continues to make investments in Central New York community. And so more recently, the president came into town and some local districts were invited. We were one of them. The Micron plant facility is solely in the North Syracuse Central School District. It is in the town of Clay, and town of Clay does stretch over towards Liverpool, but the plant itself is solely in our district. The things that they are doing is they're trying to help districts and understand how much the STEM fields are needed. And so we last year did our first chip camp for students. That was extremely successful. We will be doing another one at the end of this school year, which will include not only North Syracuse students, but we will be including Chittenango students and also ESM students. Micron is also looking at doing some things to assist districts to have other programs, Girls Who Code, and other things just to improve the amount of students that are interested in science, technology, engineering, and math. This is a picture of day one of Chip Camp. We took all of the students down to Cornell, who has a clean room similar to what Micron will have. So we had about 100, a little more than 100 students that went on day one of the field trip down to Cornell to just get an understanding of what a clean room for semiconductors would look like.
Now here's the proposed revenues, just the numbers comparing this year to last year. So you can see that our general state aid did in fact go up, although it's lower than we expected. The number actually, when our board adopted the budget, I should tell you that we expected the full funding of foundation aid. So it's included in this number, even though we're going to be about $700,000 short. And you might say, well, that sounds like a big problem. Well, it is. But the reality of it is when we put our budget together, there are always estimates of what revenues and expenses will be, and there's always variances. So we'll have to work hard this year to make up that $700,000 in either other revenues or expenses. But a couple big components of our revenues are general state aid at the top, and the tax levy, the $104 million. You can see that line for the 24-25 school year. We also, we've done very well with interest. One advantage of interest rates being higher is we've been able to earn more interest income. We're using more fund balance. So fund balance is our savings. And We feel like this is a good time to use some of our savings to support programs for our kids. And so we're using another $1 million of our fund balance, which brings that total usage up to $6,650,000. And we had an increase in our employee retirement reserve. So there's two pension costs that we deal with as a district. One is our teachers' retirement, and the other is our employees' retirement. So the difference basically is the employees are those that are not certified employees. And so this year, when the actuaries for New York State looked at the cost of operating the employee retirement system, they had a fairly large increase. And so what we decided to do was use our ERS reserve to offset some of that increase. And what that does is that allows us not to cut positions and other expenses that we need to support student programs. Now, the ERS reserve is a finite amount of money, so we're going to have to, we can't do this every year, but this year we're able to do that and create a smooth transition. The other big items in there, we service a lot of students that are Medicaid eligible. And so we actually bill Medicaid for those services, and they pay us Medicaid revenues. And then finally, the building aid number, as I showed, it's just going up nominally. And the reason that is that we haven't filed those final cost reports yet because we haven't finished projects. But in total, we have a $212 million budget, about an $8.9 million increase, or about 4.39%. And this chart, I like this chart because it really illustrates, when you look at our revenues, that the majority of our revenues come from the tax levy and state aid. Those are the two big pieces of the pie. So the tax cap. The purpose of the tax cap is to tell school districts how much they should raise taxes. That's what this formula is designed to do. And what it does is it looks at your levy for the current year, and it considers changes in pilots, those pilot agreements I talked to you about. Remember, so if Micron pilot comes in, it won't affect this year, but next year, we'd have to adjust our tax cap calculation, our tax levy, by the amount of that pilot. It also affects, looks at capital projects. So if the voters vote a project and we say, hey, this is going to cost this much money and it's going to be part of your tax levy, that gets included in here. Now, a couple things that you should know that are important is that when that project is complete and paid for, the way the capital adjustment works is that falls off your tax levy. So let me give an example. You have a 30-year mortgage on your home. Well, think about that at like, we have a 30-year mortgage on a school, or a 15-year loan on a capital project. When that loan is paid off, your tax levy is reduced by that amount. So we follow this formula. And this year's formula tells us that we should increase the tax levy limit by $3,030,000, or 2.98%. And that's on a $100,000 home before STAR, that's going to be an increase of about $55.03. And we show this next chart because it's important to note that we have 3 towns, Cicero, Clay, and Salina. And regardless of whether you live in, regardless of which town you live in, you're going to have the same impact on the full value of your home. So, assessments are different. The school district has no impact on it. We don't get involved in assessments. Some towns are full assessments, towns like Cicero and Salina, but Clay has a partial assessment. It's kind of shocking to people, I think, to realize that a $100,000 home in the town of Clay would be assessed at $2,980. But regardless, that $100,000 home in all 3 towns is going to pay about the same amount in its annual estimated school tax, and that increase will be that $55 that I mentioned earlier. Let's talk about expenditures. So this I highlight some of our bigger expenditures. And I want to talk about health costs, where we've really worked hard as a district. We have what's called a Health Oversight Committee. We work collaboratively with our teachers union and with our benefits administrators, whether it be pharmacy or healthcare, to look at innovative ways we can maintain the quality of benefits, but also reduce the cost of them. And we've implemented a number of things over the years to try to reduce our benefits cost, or I should say, reduce the impact of any increases. So we're looking at an increase this year of 5.67% in overall health care costs. And I have to tell you, versus the national average versus the state average, that's a pretty good number. Retirement costs, I mentioned the two groups, TRS and ERS. Our teachers' retirement system, we didn't experience a very significant increase in their costs. You can see it's about 0.35%. For the ERS, it was a larger increase. It was 2.1%. And that's in terms of the rate, and that's a pretty significant increase on the retirement system there. So we used that reserve. I mentioned salaries and wages because we've got some contracts under negotiation. We had to make estimates. And we use a lot of fuel. That shouldn't come as a surprise to you. We have 150 buses on the road. And so we use a lot of fuel. And so we're very sensitive to fuel costs. And we believe our budget has a good estimate for what they'll cost next year. And then energy costs. The district does something very interesting. We heat all of our buildings with natural gas, and we use a lot of electricity. And so we are part of a New York State municipal energy consortium. And so what we do is we work with the consultant to go out every 3 years. And it's not only us, it's just school districts across the state, municipalities across the state, and they bid for the energy contracts. And what that does is it allows us to lock in our electric rates, our costs for electric, as well as for natural gas. Now, if we still have a warm winter like we just had, we're going to benefit from that, right? Because we won't use as much natural gas. If rates go up quite a bit, we're kind of protected. And we actually benefited over the last 3 years because while energy costs were going up, we had locked in much lower rates. So we just rebid this. The bids became effective in May this month. And so we've considered that in our budget as well. So here's our expenditures. And I want to point out a couple of things that are really important. First line in there, the 5.54%. That is not the raises that our employees are going to get. Remember I told you that we're losing that ARP funding? So one of the things that we had to do was if we wanted to sustain some of those AIS services, academic assistance services, or we wanted to sustain some of the counseling and social worker support, we had to take some people that were previously paid for by a federal grant and absorb them into our general fund. And that's what you're seeing there. You're seeing additional people that were previously paid for on a federal grant being paid for in our general fund budget. You see the budget, I just told you that health benefits went up 5.67%, but our benefits include our retirement, they include our FICA and our dental and our workman's comp and our disability and a lot of other benefits. And again, we've really tried to squeeze these budgets down as much as possible. So the total impact is less. And then I just want to point out also, look at the BOCES number. We spent a lot of money with BOCES. And it's one of the things that BOCES allows us to take advantage of is they can provide, by servicing 23 component school districts, they can provide a specialty service that we couldn't do on our own, or we couldn't do it very well. So we collaborate with BOCES, we cooperate with them, they provide the service and we buy it from them. And that's everything from a specific program for a student to our information systems. We rely heavily on the Regional Information Center. We also buy services for our special ed population. Some of our special needs students have unique needs. And we have them in BOCES programs and special facilities. And so that's what we do with BOCES. And so, yes, there's an increase there. And we will get some additional state aid called BOCES aid in the subsequent year in which we spend the funding. So again, balanced budget, same number as the revenues, $212 million, $8.9 million increase, or a 4.39% increase. I like this chart too because it tells a very important story. We are a people-based business. The single most important thing we do is put a teacher in front of students. And so that's where our money needs to be spent. We need to make sure that everything in our organization is aligned to that classroom interaction between the teacher and the student, and that's people. Now oh, go ahead, Dan, I'm sorry. Did you
This
want to?
picture just shows our buses and part of our fleet. Again, Don had mentioned there's 150 buses in our fleet. And New York State has challenged districts to move towards zero emissions by a certain timetable starting in 2027. I want to make sure that we go on record. North Syracuse will not be purchasing a zero emission bus at this time. There are a lot of reasons. There's things that have been slowed down at the state level, but we are not looking at purchasing a zero emission bus at this time. So we retire about a bus after 10 years of service, or approximately 180,000 miles. And again, we want to make sure we have a bus that is well maintained and it's going to transport students safely. The proposed purchases is two 42-passenger gasoline buses with wheelchair lift and air conditioning to support our students with special needs. We will be purchasing 10 or proposing to purchase 10 65-passenger gasoline buses, traditionally large school buses, and there's the cost for that 10 is $1.6 million. And the other is M&O vehicles, 2 service vans and a flatbed truck. The tax impact of proposed purchases is $2.152 million, or $2.84 for a $100,000 home, full value.
Let's talk about our fund balance. So what is fund balance? I think it's a concept that confuses people at times. And so here's the long and the short of it. When we put a budget together, we do the absolute best we can to get the 1,000 accounts, line items exactly right when we're doing our expenses and we're doing our revenues. But things happen. We have a warm winter. We have we might have, some area where interest rates go up and we make a little more interest income. So there's different things that can happen that cause our budget to not come in exactly the way we expect it. And in a good year, we end up with a little extra money because our revenues that we actually collect are more than our expenses. And those extra funds go into a thing called fund balance. And that's what I'm showing you is how much money we've accumulated in our fund balance. Well, the board's aware of this, and the board says, wait a minute, we have a responsibility to our community to not overtax them and end up with extra money. That's not the game plan. So what the board does every year is they appropriate a certain amount of that fund balance toward the next year's budget. So this year, we're starting the year with a $9.3 million fund balance, which is about 4% of our budget for next year. And that 4% is what the comptroller's office recommends that we have in our fund balance. So you've basically got a decent fund balance, but we're going to use $6.6 million of that to support next year's budget, so we can sustain programs for our students. The other concept is a thing called reserves, and so reserves are specific liabilities that the district has. And so let me give you an example. If we have a big workman's compensation claim, you don't want to find out that we had to cut your child's programming because someone had a workman's compensation claim. So what we try to do is we provide for those claims. So we have an administrator that helps us. They look at all of the various claims and they tell us, hey, Joe employee got hurt on the job and this is what it might cost to take care of Joe. And they list all the claims and we just book that liability. So we have a liability set up so that when we have to pay Joe for lost time or for health, for insurance, to cover a particular medical need resulting from workman's compensation, we don't have to cut a program to do that. We have that money reserved. And we do that for tax certiorari too. So tax certiorari is when people come and they can test their taxes. So if they contest their taxes and all of a sudden the assessor says, oh yeah, you know, you're right, your house isn't worth X, it's worth Y, that's less, you don't have to pay so much in taxes. Well, we've already put the budget together. We've already done everybody's tax bills. So we have to have a place where we can charge that difference in taxes. So we actually look at all the tax certiorari matters, and we have an attorney that looks at it and says, this is how much you should reserve for every one of those matters. So everything on this list is a liability that's been independently calculated, that's been recommended to the district that we have reserved so that we can cover those liabilities without impacting programs. And I made a few notes on the bottom where we've had voter approval to establish the reserves. For example, the 2.5 million that's referenced here and the 30 million is for our capital reserve. So when we do capital projects, we're trying to put a little bit of money away, but we can't put money away unless the voters say that we can do that. So you approve that, and we can't use it unless the voters approve it. And so if you look at item C up there, we're asking the voters to approve the use of $3 million of our capital reserve and 1.4 million of our debt service fund. And I'll explain that in this next slide. So on December 8th of 2021, the voters approved the renovation and reconstruction of Lakeshore Road Elementary, Cicero Elementary, Smith Road Elementary, and CNS High School. And what's happened since then is we've been in a highly inflationary environment, and those projects are costing more than we expected. So we don't want to go back to the taxpayers and say, hey, can you give us more money? We're going to use that reserve that you approved us to, if you authorize us to use it, we're going to use that reserve that you guys authorized, and we're going to keep those projects on track without further taxing the taxpayers. Salina Free Library, as you are probably aware, we are blessed to have the library right there adjacent to our Roxborough campus, and they run wonderful programming for that community. And by law, we have to allow them to include their proposition on our ballot. And so this is the Salina Library proposition with a modest increase of $10,000 or 2%. And you'll have a chance to vote on that if you live in Salina. The budget process timeline. So the board has adopted this budget on April 17th. We've begun to do our budget presentations. We've had a couple of face-to-face and a couple of virtual meetings now. We'll continue those presentations to the community. Tonight's the budget hearing, and in 2 weeks, we'll have the budget vote and election here, as well as at the Michael J. Bragman Stadium, and that's a change. Previously, we're doing our school voting at Cicero Elementary, but now that vote will take place at the Michael J. Bragman Stadium, and that allows us to, for security reasons, not have the doors open at Cicero while kids are in session. But we've got a great stadium facility, and people can go across the street from Cicero and down to the stadium and vote there. If you live north of 481, if you live south of 481, you'll continue to vote here at the North Syracuse District Office. And if you liked this presentation and you want to hear it again, in 25 minutes, Dan and I are going online and we're going to do this virtually, and you can hear it again. And then we're also going to do another virtual session on the 14th at 7 p.m. So there's a couple more opportunities to hear the presentation for the community. And with that, we'll turn it over to questions. Microphone, if you don't.
You always do a great job at I don't know how you do it, but last year I recall on these electric buses, the state was going to pay a huge portion of those. Am I correct?
If I can just, we are, first of all, I don't want to come off as we're not in favor of taking care of the environment. We are doing everything the state asks us to do. We've done fleet studies, facility studies, and we've applied for grants, both NYSERDA grants and EPA grants. The electric bus today costs $480,000. A traditional bus costs about $160,000, $165,000. So we applied for a grant and we actually got a $200,000 grant. But if we buy the bus with that grant, it's still going to cost $100,000 more than a traditional bus. So we've got another grant we've applied for, and we're hopeful to get that grant. If we do, we'll come back out to the voters and ask you, can we buy this bus? Because it's a little closer now to what a gas bus would cost. We just want to be good stewards of the community's money, and that's why we're not jumping in too quickly with the electric bus initiative. And remember, it's a zero emissions initiative. So there's been talk that maybe hydrogen fuel cell will be a good vehicle for us to use. And just one more point on that, of the 107 home to school routes that we have, with today's electric technology, only 30 of them can be electrified. We had a fleet study done. So this technology's got a long way to go. And we just want to not jump in too soon. Sorry if that's more answer than you were looking for.
All right, I understood it. Last year, they were subsidizing that 480,000, or is that the net cost to you, the 480?
The only subsidy they were going to give us are these grants, and we did get it.
From New York, State, then I misunderstood them.
Yeah,
last
we
year.
only got a $200,000 grant
Oh,
against
okay.
480. So that would mean it would still
Oh, yeah,
cost
okay, all right.
280.
Then,
Yeah.
okay, I understand that. The pilots, you mentioned pilots plural. You're receiving a number of those right now from corporations, is that?
Sure. We have a whole list of, the Onondaga County tries to attract businesses, and they've given pilot
that's
agreements
all
to a
right.
lot of different companies. And so, yes, there are pilots in place right now
For us.
that we're receiving funds, and we're reducing your taxes by that amount. I can tell you, actually, if you
No,
don't mind.
I'm just, all right.
Oh,
Who
no, it's-
negotiates the pilot with Micron?
So
Who
not
represents
us, not us. Yeah, it's a great question. So Dan and I have actually met with the economic development folks here in Onondaga County, and we don't have a seat at that table. That's really the county. The county does that negotiating, and they let us know. You know, we share our thoughts with them. We made sure that they at least understood that the school district wouldn't get any additional money. But remember, we want to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. And so remember, they're negotiating that pilot and we're passing that through to you, the taxpayers. So since we don't receive it, we don't really have a seat at the table since we don't
One
benefit
more,
from
I'll
that.
sit down.
No, it's good. These are good.
Workers' comp, I always thought it was an insurance company.
Yeah.
I never knew that you or the corporation is actually paying that
Yep.
monthly salary now forever for the guy that got hurt.
Yeah. So the way it works is you can buy workman's comp insurance.
You can buy.
Yes, individual entities can buy that.
Yeah.
But when you get to a certain size, it's actually cheaper to be self-insured and have somebody administer it. So our real focus is employee safety. If you, I'm gonna give you a simple example. Do you remember when you were a kid getting on the bus and they had that handle that doesn't exist anymore? They push a button and that repetitive motion injury. So we're constantly looking at ways to make sure that we can keep our employees safe. And we have some insurance coverage associated with workman's comp. Some of our claims are insured, but the vast majority of it's just self-insured, and we have to reserve whenever an employee gets hurt.
Will it ever get to the point where it's cheaper just to get insurance and have them live with it, the insurance companies?
The short answer is I don't think so. And the reason for that is that remember, insurance companies are looking to make money.
Sure.
So that's going to be the administration cost plus the claims cost plus their profit. And in our case, it's just the claims cost and the administrative cost. So we think that actuarially, we think we're better off being self-insured.
Are those pilots going to expire, like you said, the ones you're currently getting now?
Yeah,
Do you
there
have an expiration date on that?
yes, each one of them does. So we have a list of maybe 13 or 14 pilot agreements that are out there, and they all have different expiration dates.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
Questions? Seeing none, in closing, I'm going to introduce the 5 candidates that are running for school board, of which 3 are here, I think. We have Mark Thorne, Paul Farfalle, that's me, Nick Edwards in the back. Hi, Nick. Beth Kramer, who's not here right now, and Andrew Matyasik. Did I say that correctly? Matty my name's been butchered my whole life, so I apologize. Matty Asic. So those are the 5 candidates who'll be on the ballot. Is that the order of the? That is the order of the ballot, which is why we read it that way, okay? So thank you. This meeting's adjourned.